Hey everybody, welcome back to Kat's Kitchen. I'm so glad you guys are back here with me for another episode. Today we're going to be doing some canning projects. So we're going to be canning today some ground beef marinara sauce, and we're also going to be probably going to try to, I have two big roasts here, and I'm going to try to cold pack our beef roast. If I don't have time, I might cook them down in the crock pot and then hot pack them tomorrow. But what we're getting started on first is we're gonna brown up our ground beef for our tomato sauce. So I already have both stock pots here. I'm gonna show you this here. I have my two stock pots here already going with my ground beef, and I just had a little bit of oil in there and I'm just letting them cook down. Next, we're going to have a bunch of onion here we're gonna dice up and add to our beef while it's cooking. This one back here is actually beef that I had already browned up, so I'm going to start the sauce process in here, and then once our beef is done cooking, we'll put it into our large pot back here. So I'm just going to give this a little stir. And then this is actually what we'll have for dinner tonight too. We'll have some spaghetti, either spaghetti or penne, I'm not quite sure. But I figured when you're doing a big cooking day like this, if you can, whatever your big batch cooking, if you can have that for dinner that day, or maybe for a couple of nights, that'll help you to not stress out too much about doing a big project and obviously getting dinner cooked as well. So I like to use this metal spatula whenever I'm cooking. I like to make sure, this is not a sponsor at all or anything, but I like to make sure that my utensils are metal all the way through. I've had some before that have like a plastic handle and then it's a metal end, but I've noticed whenever I'm stirring a lot of different meat or working with a high quantity of stuff that usually they're connected with screws and they'll separate, and I've actually had them separate in my meat before. And then unless I find the screws, I can't obviously use that meat because I don't want someone to choke on that. So I just figured I'd throw that out there for you guys. I know people like their meat mashers. I've never tried that before, but I hear those are really great too. So I'm just gonna try to break this up a little bit more here, and then we're gonna start our seasoning. And since we're gonna season our sauce later on, once we start that, I'm just gonna season our meat. We're gonna do some salt and pepper in here. And then I will probably put some onion and garlic powder in here as well. And then I'll put some minced garlic in here, as well as our diced onion that I'm gonna have to cut up here. So you wanna let your ground meat cook for a while. We're gonna be just watching it because like I said, we have a lot of ground beef that we're working with here. I wanna say I have about 7 pounds total in both pots. And now I'm just dicing up our onions so that we can get those sauteing with and browning up with the meat.
So just a little tip for you guys, if you have a lot of onions to dice up, or if you just have a lot of onions to use, what you can do is either slice or dice them however you want them to, however you want to cook with them later on, and then put them into a freezer Ziploc bag, and you can store them in your freezer that way. And then that way, whenever you go to use onions, then it's, your prep time is a lot faster. I know every year in October, before our local farm closes out for the year, I end up buying a bunch of onions. And, because there's nothing like farm grown or homegrown onions, so that's what I try to do. So if you get some that are sprouting, or the ones that need used up right away, that's a really good tip to just pop them in the freezer. And I'm just using, I believe I used all of these onions here, my bench scraper. You want to, whenever your onions caramelize with the meat, it really brings out an awesome flavor, a really nice umami flavor. And that's really the only way to get it, is to saute everything together. You can saute your onions first prior to putting in your meat if you'd like, or you can do it together. I was on a little bit of a time crunch today, so I'm just cooking them together because it's going to take a long time.
Now I'm just going to give this a nice good mix, and then I'm going to let this cook. I have the lid on. It's like about half on and half off. I almost forgot our minced garlic. Leave you guys a link down below to a website for pressure canned marinara sauce. Anytime you're doing a low acid food, such as vegetables or protein, it always has to be pressure canned. You can't water bath can it. Looks like we have enough onions in here, so I'll wrap these up for later. Okay, so now I'm just gonna let this cook for a while. And I have this on about a medium to mid-high. Alrighty friends, so here we are at our back pot where I'm gonna start the sauce with the ground beef that I cooked the other day. Now you can use any type of sauce you want. I'm just using a store-bought one for this because that's what I have on hand. Like I said, I'll leave you the link to the recipe if you want to make one from scratch. The can. And I'm just going to rinse out these containers. We're just going to get our sauce cooking so that when our ground beef here is ready to go, we'll drain the grease, and then we'll end up combining all this together. Now to this, I'm probably going to add some minced garlic, Italian seasoning, basil, parsley, onion and garlic powder, and possibly some salt and pepper. Salt and pepper to taste. Even though it's coming pre-mixed, I always like to flavor it the way we like it. And this is just gonna cook low and slow with a lid half on, half off until the flavors come together and we're good to go.
Alrighty friends, so you guys may be wondering why I'm using store-bought sauce for this. And really, I advocate for just having and using what you have on hand to make your life a little bit easier. I mostly speak to the common, home cook. So that's really why I try to give you guys a little bit of diversity. If you would like I said, I'm going to leave you guys a link to that homemade sauce recipe in the description box below. Excuse me, you can check that out. But there's really no shame if you got to use store-bought sauce, or if you have your home canned sauce, or you know, whatever kind of sauce you're working with, really, just as long as it qualifies for canning, then you're just perfectly fine. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that to you guys because I know some people are really sticklers about only using certain ingredients, and you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And when you're busy and you're working, you have kids, you have school, you have etc., families, you know, sometimes, you know, we just need an easier way to do things and get to the end goal. And that's just one of the ways I'm showing you here. I have lots of recipes on homemade sauce from scratch, homemade canned sauce from scratch from last year. Definitely go check that out there in my canning playlist if you're interested in that. Same with the jarred garlic. I know I'll probably get some people saying, like, why am I using jarred garlic? It's because my life is extremely busy and that's what works for me right now. Maybe there might be another point in my life where I can crush all my garlic or put it all in the food processor and zip it up, but right now is not one of those times. So I just want to encourage you guys, give yourselves grace when you're cooking and canning. Really the end goal is to get the job done safely and accurately. And if you need to use certain products to get you there a little faster, like some jarred sauce or some jarred garlic, then go ahead and do that. So here I'm just explaining, I'm seasoning up this sauce as I would whether we were going to eat it right away or if we were canning it. So go ahead and season to your liking. In here I do parsley, garlic, onion powder, Italian seasoning, salt and pepper. I don't put the salt in until later on though. I'm going to turn our temperature here just down to about a little bit, about a mid-low here. So I want this to kind of cook slow and really develop those flavors. Now, I would pretty much do the same thing if I was cooking, you know, with sauce from the store, even for a smaller portion for us for dinner. I would just obviously use probably 1 jar of sauce, 1 pound of ground beef, and maybe I would add in some stewed tomatoes, crushed tomatoes, or diced tomatoes, just to give it some texture. Alrighty, so now we're just gonna pop our lid on, half off, because I don't really want this to boil. And then we'll just let this cook gently. Okay, friends, so we are back here. I still have a whole onion here. What I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna use this, and I have like another half onion in here for the rest of the meat that we want to can, our big roast. I'm just going to roughly dice this up here. And then I have a large stainless bowl here to my left. And then for our roast meat, we're going to debone it and cut it into about at least 1 to 2 inch cubes. And then we're just basically prepping it so that we can cold pack it. So that's the way that I prefer to do beef and chicken if possible. But we can't do that with ground beef because it's too dense. Okay. I'm gonna set that bowl aside here. And let's get you a look here at what we're doing. I just have 2 large roasts, one here, one here. I'm gonna cut these open, we'll rinse them, and then we'll get them cubed up and deboned.
also going to trim the fat, of course. You can leave some fat on there, but we'll just try to trim what we can. I'm going to cut this one open. I always wash my sink really, really well after doing things like this, just so you guys are not concerned about cross-contamination. So not to worry about that. Okay, so here we go. We've got our 2 large roasts. These were actually unmarked. I think they're chuck roasts, if I'm not mistaken. Or round roast, because usually round roasts have the this round bone in them too. That could be it. Could just be one big one. Last year we ended up getting smaller round roasts. That's why I was a little uncertain of what this cut was. I have my garbage can right next to me here. I'm just trimming around the fat cap, and we'll try to do our best to cut against the grain and start cutting our 1-inch cubes, 1 to 2-inch cubes up until we hit the bone. We'll cut around the bone, and then we'll put everything in our bowl with our onions. If you guys have never pressure canned meat before, I would highly encourage it. It's a really nice convenience item. You don't have to wait for meat to thaw out, you know, of your freezer or anything like that. It's already cooked, so if you're busy, it's just super nice to have. And it's extremely tender. All the chicken and the beef that I've ever pressure canned always came out really, really tender. Okay, so if you're not quite sure where to start, find a main cartilage path here. You can see there's one right here, or a large line of fat. And you can actually cut right along that for starters. It'll do 2 things. It'll give you a nicer cut, and then it'll also cut out that cartilage for you. And then just slowly pull back, let your knife do the work. Hopefully your knife is super sharp. I've now been sharpening my knife, even if I don't show you on air, online, I've been sharpening it every single time before I use it. And we're gonna get this out of here. We're just gonna cut this back. You can use gloves if you don't like the feel of raw meat, if your hands are sensitive, or if you just want a little more control, because it is a little slippery, obviously, when you're dealing with meat. And then here, I'm just gonna rough chop here our cubes. And right into our bowl of onions. Feeling right there for that cartilage. This is a big piece of fat. It's okay to have some of the fat on the meat, like I said, but you don't want too much because it may inhibit the seal whenever it's in the pressure canning process. A little bit of marbleization is perfectly fine. If you cut against the grain, you're gonna get a more tender meat in the end. And that goes for all proteins. It almost wants to fall apart right where I should be cutting it, so that will give you another clue if you're not sure where to cut. Just pick it up and see where it wants to fall apart. And you can see this is opening up here. Take the butt of your knife, just kind of pierce it, and pull that section away from itself. And then you can break it up into smaller pieces and make it easier to work with that way. When your knife isn't cutting through, that means you're hitting the cartilage. I'm kind of cutting through it because I'm trying to break up that line. I don't really want that in my finished product. So I'm just trying to cut that cartilage out of there. You can save all the scraps if you want to do a beef stock. Raw packing meat is probably one of the easiest things that I've ever canned. You see me here cleaning the meat, deboning it, cubing it up to size, and then you literally put it in your jar, clean jar with broth. You can do broth, you can do water, really whatever one you want. If you're doing just water, I would recommend at least a little bit of salt in there just for a little bit of flavor. The salt doesn't help preserve it in any way. And that's it, guys. You put a new lid on it, put a ring on it, and then you pressure can it for the time according to your elevation at sea level. So this is really the only preparation part. When you make other things, usually there's a lot more steps involved. Trying to cut out around this bone, and so I'm trying to see where it wants to kind of come apart on me. I'm going to cut all this off here because I don't want to need that.
So I do want to encourage you guys, if you've never pressure canned before or have never tried pressure canning meat before, if you do eat that, to give it a try. Because like I mentioned, pressure canning meat is one of the easiest things that I've ever had to pressure can. And so far I've canned pretty much lots of different types of vegetables. And, as far as for the protein, I've canned ground beef cubes like this, and also some chicken cubes. And it just makes for faster meals. So definitely want to encourage you guys to do that. So I'm just trimming up everything here. I am going to save a little bit of these scraps for some beef stock that I'm going to make for whenever we go to package up this beef. I want to put it in a beef stock instead of just water. Like I mentioned, that's completely up to you if you just want to use water or beef stock for this. I've just found that beef stock gives it a little bit more flavor. And when you're pressure canning, it's going to give off so much pressure and heat, obviously, that it's going to make this beef really, really tender, which is awesome. So we're kind of fast tracking it in the pressure canning process. And you'll see here, once we're done cubing up all the beef, that these 2 big roasts that we had actually turned out to be maybe a medium-sized bowl worth, even though it looked like a lot more because of everything we're trimming off of it. If I'm not mistaken, I think these 2 large roasts gave me, I believe, 4 quarts of beef and onions. There's a lot that you can do with your pressure canned beef, especially because we're seasoning it pretty generically here with just the beef broth, the onions. You can shred it up and make tacos. You can do like beef tips and noodles or rice with gravy. You could do pot roast out of it, or like a, beef stew or beef vegetable soup. So you just kind of have to use your imagination, and that's what I'm always encouraging people to do. I know that I feel like in the past several years, we've kind of stopped using our imagination as we get older, when we become adults. And I just want to encourage you all to, use the imagination that God gave you and just really tap into all the amazing talents that we all have, because we all have amazing talents that we can share with each other and our families in the world. So, like I said, you can do this. This is really easy. The only stipulation is just making sure to follow the instructions per each recipe. And I'll be leaving you guys a link to a website down below to where I get the majority of my recipes from for canning. And if you do pick up a canner brand new, it should come with a manual as well. And sometimes in the manual, well, most of the time rather, it should come with some recipes in there that you can also follow. A lot of this portion here that you see me working with, there's a lot of cartilage and a lot of bone in this piece. So the majority of this is going to be used for stock, but that's perfectly fine because we need to make stock anyway. And the whole purpose of taking out as much fat as possible when you're canning meat in general is you don't want there to be too much fat inside the jar, because when it pressure cans, the pressure canner is actually pulling out the oxygen inside the jar. That's what happens during the canning process. That's how you get your seal, and obviously how you're able to store things shelf stable. But if you have too much fat inside your jar and it's pulling out the oxygen, it's going to pull out that fat too, what we call siphoning. And when you lose liquid outside your jar, and that could inhibit your seal on your lid, which means that you'll just have to use that right away and put it in your refrigerator. But it wouldn't be shelf stable, obviously.
All right, friends, so we are back here. Our meat is all browned. I did drain this, and then I have back here some of the beef bones and scraps from our roast, and I have this going in some nice good water for our stock. I'm actually just turning this up a little bit to medium. We're gonna need this to cover our roast that we cut up for our canning process. Now we're over here with our sauce and our ground beef. I tried putting some in the sauce just to divvy it up. Neither of my pots are big enough to hold everything. So I'm just gonna grab some sauce from over here and put it in with our meat. And we're just gonna work with 2 different pots on this one. And I'm just gonna try to get the ratios the same. And we'll see where we go. We'll give it a nice good mix and we'll give it a taste. Give this a nice mix here. All right, friends, so since this pot is all full up, and in here I still have some meat, but I have more sauce in this one. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna taste both for flavor, make sure that everything is to our liking. And then what I'm gonna do is whenever I go to put these in jars, I'm just gonna put, you know, a little bit of a ratio. So I'm probably gonna do probably about 2/3 the one that has a little bit more meat in, and then the 1/3 I'll top off with more of the sauce one. They're both going to be great. I'll just mix it up. When I debubble, it'll mix it up together, and then we'll be good to go. So I'm just going to do that now. Like I said, our stock is still cooking. I'm actually going to turn it up a little bit more because I kind of wanted it to get up to a boil and start cooking for us so that we have it ready for canning. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go downstairs and get our jars. I'm going to be using quart jars for this. You can do quarts or pints, whatever you want. Just follow the recipe on the timing instructions for whatever you're using. And yeah, so I'm going to get those ready, and I think that's about it. I'm going to bring up my canner and all my stuff so that once the sauce is ready and all done cooking, I can start pressure canning them. So I'll see you guys back here soon when we're pressure canning.
Alrighty, friends, so you can see I'm working with my quarts here, and I had to get a lighter shirt on because anytime you're canning in any form, it gets really hot, so it's definitely good for a winter project. I'm starting to jar up my meat marinara sauce first because that's what was done first. I'm eventually going to get both canners working. You can see there how pretty it is. And first though, I want to get my initial load of sauce in my canner. I have a Presto pressure canner. I believe it's a 32 quart. I can fit 7 quarts and 20 pints in it if I double stack. So here is pretty normal SOP. We are just putting the product in, debubbling, we're putting a new lid on it. You can reuse your rings as long as they're not rusty. And then just obviously wiping the rim before the lid goes on with a little bit of vinegar. I think I'm talking to Mark in the background there. He was there with me on that day. So I want to mention too that this is a really nice convenience item to have on your shelf, is the meat marinara, because anytime you need to do a fast pasta dish, I mean, you name it, anything you would need a meat marinara for, excuse me, lasagna, spaghetti, penne, whatever you're making. And then you could very easily pull this off of your shelf, put it in a pot, and you could turn this into a rosé sauce by adding some heavy cream, half and half, or some ricotta cheese in there and mixing that up. And it'll completely change the flavor for you, but yet you're still making and canning one product. So we got a good bit of quarts of this sauce canned up. I'll show you guys at the end. I forget how many quarts we ended up with, but it was a good bit there. You can see how simple this is. Once you guys get yourself set up with a little bit of a system, I actually hand washed all of my jars in my sink there and warmed them up with really, really hot water. So they're ready for the hot sauce. And the water that's in my canner right now had been heating up. You can actually see the steam coming off of it in the background. You want everything to be about the same temperature whenever you put it all together. Vice versa, if you're working with a cold product, you want everything to be cold because you want everything to come up to temperature about the same time. Now, just recently, just this past week, we had sauce with the family. You know, we had a little Italian Christmas, so I made lasagna and some meat sauce. And I had about a gallon-sized bag left over from that event. So what I did is I just put that in a freezer bag and labeled and dated it and put it in my freezer. So I do like to have, excuse me, I do like to have things in different forms and preserved in different ways. If I had a freeze dryer, I'd probably freeze dry some too. You can see here I'm checking my canning lid, checking the little spout. I like to just blow through it a little bit to make sure that it's not clogged. Check the seal. Right now I'm making sure that the lid is on properly and tight. And then I just crank that up to high. I'm going to fill the rest of my jars while I'm waiting for my canner to vent. We need the canner to vent for 10 minutes before we put the weight on, and then you need to wait until your gauge gets up to pressure, and then once it's up to pressure, then we start our cooking time. All in all, this process does take all day, if not 2 days worth, but it's super worth it, and it's very satisfying when you're all done. All right, so here you can see me just filling up a stock pot with some salt, and we're gonna make some spaghetti for dinner tonight since we have all this meat marinara. That's one thing I always recommend to everyone when you're doing a big project for cooking. Just put, a portion of that aside for your dinner that night. That way it doesn't overwhelm you with all of this preparation and trying to feed your family as well. So with doing it this way, it definitely makes it a lot easier because we still need to eat around here, so we need to always have accommodations for that as well. So you can see here I've got my salt water on. You want to salt your water for pasta salty like the sea. So I'm just cleaning up here in between my work. I've already jarred up all of the sauce and I just put it on the table behind me since my kitchen's a little bit small. And once my pasta water is done, I'm going to bring out my other canner. I have the same canner that I currently have. My grandma actually had the same one from years ago when she was canning, and she gave it to me, and I was really very happy about that. So I'm just trying to get dinner started here, and then we're going to switch over to canning our beef. And there we go. I'm just starting to get the jars ready for that. I didn't mention before, but the reason why you want everything to come up to the same temperature, you know, for your canning process, whether you're starting with a hot or cold product, is because you don't want your jars to crack. If there's too much of an influx in temperature, then your jars are more prone to crack. They may not crack on you while you're putting the item in it here on the counter, but they're more inclined to crack whenever they're under pressure. You can see I'm showing you it's starting to vent now, but not very strong to where I want to start timer. Okay, so now we are fixing to get our meat packed. I have that meat looks so good. Look how beautiful that is. I have our bouillon cubes. I'm going to do 2 bouillon cubes per each quart jar, because I didn't flavor our stock with anything. I just boiled, you know, the beef scraps and bones that we had from our roast in water. I boiled them for a few hours. So to get that beefy flavor, we're going to have the bouillons help us out with that. Plus there's also some salt that will come out of the bouillon cubes, so we don't really need to add salt for the flavor with this. So you can see I'm packing in our beef cubes and onions. You can take a look at that there. I was lightly packing that down. You don't want to pack that too tight, and the reason why is because you still need, you know, the air to escape whenever it goes through the pressure canning process, like I mentioned to you guys before. So this isn't like a hard, you know, pack everything in. It's just, you'll see me take my fingers and lightly pack it down, just because when this does cook, there is going to be a little bit of space. When you're raw packing, you could do an inch head space, which is at the very bottom of your little rim. You can use your little measuring tool too if you're not sure. So you see how straightforward this meat packing was. Like, it was super easy. They call this a raw pack because we didn't cook the meat prior to canning it. It's going to cook under pressure, obviously, in our canner. And I believe the quarts cook for 90 minutes if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, I always check every time. I try not to, you know, remember. I'll leave you guys the link to the recipe down below. Here I am just washing out my bowl, and I am getting a strainer for straining off our beef stock that has been cooking for a few hours. So I'm just going to turn that off and pour that through our strainer. And then this is going to be the liquid that I'm obviously using to top off our beef. So there I'm just showing you the really pretty beef broth that we made. Like I said, that's just the bones and the fat boiled down in purified water. And I'm just washing up my funnel now, my canning funnel. And then we're just going to ladle in our broth. This whole time I've been checking my canner. The weight is on at this point, and our timer has started for our first canner. I'm just have to keep adjusting my heat so that the pressure stays in the range that I need it to. And I've got my broth in there now. We're going to debubble. And simple as that. We're going to debubble, clean the rims with vinegar, and then a new lid, a ring, and that's it. Debubbling is very, very important, and because you're trying to help hurry up, I want to say you're trying to help the canner really, because you're pushing the product around in the jar and you're helping the liquid to get dispersed throughout all the nooks and crannies of all the food product that you have in there. And then once that goes down a little bit, you can see I had to add in a little bit more liquid just to top off to get our 1-inch headspace. Using the vinegar, you can either use, if you have an apple cider vinegar, really any type of vinegar you want to just clean the top of your rim. You can do that. White vinegar is usually what I use, and then you can pour a little bit into your canner as well before you start it. There you go, look at that. And it'll actually give you a prettier jar. For some reason, it kind of helps clean it because it almost gives it like a steam bath or a shower while they're in there getting canned. So sometimes when you're canning, there will be like this powdery white residue.
Okay, everybody, so we are all done canning. This is actually the next day. So I have already washed all of our jars. I took the rings off, and I just wanted to show you what the jars look like after we washed them, because there was a bit of siphoning that happened. So here is our meat marinara sauce. We ended up with 8 of those, and then we have 3 of our beef stew. Well, kind of like beef stews, beef stew meat, and our onions in our broth. So just a few things that you can do with this. Obviously, after you can them, you know, we already washed them today, and then we're going to label and date them and put them away in our pantry. So obviously, meat marinara sauce, that's pretty self-explanatory. You can do tons of different pasta dishes with that, even incorporate that into some certain pasta casseroles and whatnot. And then for our beef with our beef broth and onions, this you can do several things with. So this is kind of like just a base for a few different recipes. I know it looks a little weird because, you know, obviously there's fat floating around in there. You can drain that off or use that whenever you go to use it, and, you know, reuse that broth as well. So a few different things you can make with our beef here is you can make, you can pull the beef apart and make shredded beef tacos. You can do like a beef stew, a beef soup, or even like a beef pot pie. And then obviously once you would, you know, drain off the meat, if you keep the liquid, you can make a gravy with it. You could do beef tips and gravy, something like that, over some mashed potatoes. So that's pretty much what these jars are for, just to make our future lives a lot easier, and also to help us preserve in a different way. So that way we're cleaning out our freezers a little bit in case we need more freezer space, and then we can turn to these, you know, and turn around, open them up, heat them up, and have a quick meal. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all on the next one. Bye-bye, friends.